Hello and welcome, Hero Forge fans. I am Dr. Faust of Dr. Faust Painting Clinic, and I am here to bring you the first in a series of videos on how to paint your customized hero miniatures. Since this is the first video in the series, we're going to keep things very simple. We're just worried about getting paint on the miniature, and we're going to go over two very simple painting techniques: dry brushing and washes. Before getting into the actual painting, let's go over some of the supplies you're going to need. First thing you're going to need is a palette of some sort, just something non-porous to put paint on. I use a ceramic tile. You need two water vessels, one for regular paint and one for metallics. You need some paper towels for wiping your brushes on. And also, you're going to want to get some files and a hobby knife, or at the very least, just a hobby knife. That's used for cleaning up any small imperfections on the miniature. You are also going to need a few different brushes. I would recommend a number 1 and or 2, a small 10-aught, and a small flat as well. To start off with, get golden Taklon bristles or maybe synth sable. I wouldn't spend money on really expensive brushes until you know how to properly treat them. And then we're going to need paint, a whole lot of paint. We're going to be using Vallejo in this series, which is very high quality paint, and you'll probably want to buy colors specific to whatever you are painting. If you're not sure exactly what to get, I would recommend some basic colors. Get one of each of your main colors. Get a black and white paint. Get a few different shades of brown, and also, since we're going to be working on inks in this video, we're going to be using those as well, mainly brown and black ink. So finally, let's begin painting our half-demon paladin here. We are starting with the armor because that is the largest surface area on the miniature, and we are base coating it with a mix of Vallejo Model Air Gun Gray mixed with some game color black, because I decided to go for a darker armor look to him. While it is good practice to paint within the lines and try to paint neatly, at the first stage here, you can be a little bit messy since nothing else is on the miniature has been painted yet. And again, we're going over basic, simple techniques here. So if you're a little off here and there, that's totally fine. There's some cleanup work we can do on it at the end. For our first highlight, we are going to dry brush on some straight gun gray, and that brings us to our first lesson. What is dry brushing? Dry brushing is a very easy technique to add highlights to your model. It's best used on rough surface areas like fur or hair. It also works well with metallics because of the solid particles in the paint. And if you're just kind of in a hurry and just want to quickly paint something, it's fine to use as well. What you want to do is get a flat brush and put a small amount of paint on the tip, and then scrub the brush against a paper towel to remove a majority of the paint. And then all you have to do is scrub the model. Because there is so little paint on the brush, it catches only on the raised areas of the model, leaving the previous color in the recesses. So it gives you a real quick highlight on whatever you're painting. So back to our paladin, and once again we are dry brushing on some of the gun metal, and you can see that's adding a lot more sparkle to the raised surface areas of the model. You do have to be careful with dry brushing, especially with metallics, because the flakes tend to flick all over the model. So it's best that we are doing this as a first stage. If we were doing this as a last stage, we're probably going to get a mess on whatever else we painted previously. After that, we apply another dry brushing layer, this time with some steel added to our gun gray, so we get a lighter color. And we're dry brushing once again, however this time using a bit more of a delicate touch. We're not forcibly scrubbing the miniature, just kind of lightly brushing over it just to get a little bit of extra highlight on some of the raised details without covering up everything we just did with the previous step. Dry brushing is rather a crude method of adding highlights, as I think I already mentioned, and it's not going to highlight perfectly, so if you so desire, you can go back and with some thin paint clean up some areas to make them look nicer. For example, here on the trim, I'm trying to highlight that, make it more pronounced by adding a coat of Vallejo Model Air Steel. And then we highlight the trim with some Vallejo Model Air Silver. If you're a bit confused regarding, I keep saying shades and highlights and what have you, I'm going to go into more detail in that in a future video. Suffice it to say now, highlights are the areas where the sun is going to be reflecting off the surface area the most, as opposed to the shades where they're going to be in shadow. That creates contrast on the miniature, which we want to emphasize to make things look more pronounced on the miniature. These very small, tiny details, we want them to pop so you can see them while they're on the table. So we are done with the highlights on the model. Now we're going to add a little bit of shade, and for that we are using some inks. And so let's go over our second technique for this video, ink washes. Inks are for shade what dry brushing is for highlighting. It's a quick and easy way to add some shade to your model. Inks are highly concentrated pigment and do need thinning to use. How much to thin them really depends on the color you're using and what you're applying it to. Really rough estimate would be about 1:5 ratio. So we thin our ink, we load up our brush, and we don't want to completely flood the model because that can end up leaving tide marks. So we touch the brush to a paper towel just to absorb a little bit of the excess moisture, and we just wipe it all over the miniature. The wash does all the work, so you just need to apply one coat and just let it sit there and dry. If you're having problems with getting your wash to dry properly, you can add mediums to it, like a matte medium, or actually I prefer using Glaze medium, which makes the wash easier to use. Also want to mention that there are some companies that make pre-thinned washes that you can use straight out of the bottle, like Games Workshop has their shade colors. And also Vallejo has some shades as well. So back to our Devil Paladin, and I'm using a mixed ink wash here. It's black and blue ink mixed together. Normally for armor, I would mix black and brown. Black for shade, brown for a little bit of dirt. But since this is a Paladin, we figure he's going to be a little bit cleaner. We add a little bit of blue instead, just a small amount. And all we have to do is just wipe it on the model. You can see that we are not completely flooding it with paint. We're trying to mainly concentrate it into the recesses. If we have it rest on any large flat surface areas, you want to clean it up with a little a dry brush just to absorb that excess moisture. Let's move on to the tabard now, and I've already undercoated that with some Vallejo Model Color Violets, and now I've mixed up a ratio of a 50-50 mix of violet with blue violet, and we are proceeding to add the highlights. Basically, this is the different standard way of highlighting a model rather than using dry brushing, because it's a little cramped corners in there right now, and we couldn't really dry brush this well without hitting the armor. I think I already mentioned about thinning your paint. That's something you definitely want to do, and we will go over that in an upcoming video in more detail. This paint right here I have right now is fairly thick. I normally thin paint to about minimum of 1 to 3 paint to water. This is closer to 1:1 because I'm trying to keep this very basic. The thinner your paint, the more subtle your highlighting is going to be, your transition between your highlights and your shades and your base coat. Next, we apply a second highlight. We have about a mix here, still of the blue violet with violet. However, we have about 75% blue violet now as opposed to 25% regular violet. And proceeding to add another highlight. We're leaving some of the previous highlight showing. We don't want to cover up everything, but we just want more of a transition between those highlight colors. And then finally we use straight blue violet just to pick out some of the edging on the tabard. Now we've only used 4 layers of colors here. Normally for highlighting, I personally would be using about 5 different highlight shades, the base coat, and 2 shade colors. So that's a lot more layers. You can keep things simple and just do 3 layers minimum, or if we're doing 4 here. But the less you use, the more prominent the transition between your highlights and shades are going to be, and so they're going to be more obvious. If you use more layers, for example, if we went with the violet-blue-violet ratio, if we went to 90%, then 80, then 70, then 60, you're going to get a much smoother transition, but of course it's going to take a lot longer. For the skin, I am base coating with Model Color Dark Cadmium Red. And I went with red because I figured it would contrast well with the paladin look on the armor and the rest of the miniature. So, interesting dichotomy there. The traditional devil man look in a paladin uniform makes it a bit more interesting. Next is Model Color Carmine Red, and the previous color is our shade color, what would normally be done with the wash, except for we apply it first in this situation. And now our Carmine Red here is our base coat, and that's going over majority of the surface area of the skin. So we're just leaving the cadmium red in the deepest recesses and covering majority of the area here with the Carmine Red. And then our final highlight, I've mixed in some rose brown, which is a sort of beige pink color, to our Carmine Red, and proceeding to add the final highlights, picking out the nose, the cheeks, eyebrow ridge. This guy has eyebrows actually, so we don't truly have to worry about that area, but top of the ears, areas like that. When it comes to painting small areas, you don't need too many transitional colors. Since all we have to worry about here is a face and a tail, 3 layers of paint, 3 highlights is enough. We don't have to worry about applying 5 or 6 or 7 or any more. Let's go back to the tabard for a moment, because it is a very large, flat, and very boring piece on the miniature. It really needs something to spice it up. And we can do that just by doing a very simple additional paint job here, going kind of outside the lines and just painting some other colors into it, so we have a 2-tone effect. I decided to go for kind of a traditional knight look with a 2-tone tabard, and so I am doing quarters of the tabard, repainting those with some Vallejo game color Jade green. For the highlights, I simply mixed in some white to the Jade green and proceeded to add a few highlights, and did this twice, adding white each time. Then to separate the two colors, I added a line of gold trim. It's a mix of yellow ochre mixed with natural wood. I just ran a line straight down the front and the back of the tabard. And this adds a little bit more color, makes the tabard more interesting. Also, it helps to tie in the little bits of gold that we'll add on the miniature in other areas. Sorry, a little off camera here. Metallic paints can be a little difficult to paint because of the solid particles that give them that metallic sheen, and they don't cover very well sometimes. So you want to undercoat first before applying. And for our Game Color Glorious Gold here, I've undercoated with some Vallejo Model Color English Uniform. You don't have to use this specific color, you just want to use something that's a yellowish brown, similar in shade to the gold itself. To highlight the gold, we add some silver to it, and you want to apply this highlight sparingly. Over highlighting gold, it starts to look a bit more silver or like fake gold. So we just want to catch very small areas on the sword pommel and a few of the trim areas that we did. Definitely do not want to overdo it, and we're only going to do one highlight. And then to shade it, some brown ink thinned, and we're not applying it like we did on the armor. We're not just going to cover everything and flood the whole area. It's applied more like another layer of paint. We're just applying it in the recesses, and the transparent nature of the ink still lets some of that gold sheen shine through. I decided to do something special for his sword. I ended up not liking the end results, but I decided to include it in this video just to show, you know, even I make mistakes. Sometimes you want to go over an area that didn't come out the way you thought it would be, and you can just paint over most of the time and just paint another color. But for the sword, we are base coating with Vallejo Model Color Sky Blue. For the shade on the bottom edge of the sword, I am shading that with some Game Color Electric Blue. And then for the other edge that we want to highlight, going back to the Sky Blue and adding white to that. So the ice sword just seemed a little bit too, I don't know, prominent on the miniature to me. So I decided to go back to something a bit more traditional. I base coated the sword with silver, and then I'm just using some very light glazes of very thin blue ink. A couple different layers, just letting it dry between layers, just to add a very slight blue glow to the sword. So this technique is a bit more simple and easy to do if you just want to add a little bit of something extra to your figure's weapons. And finally, we get to the dark lining stage. This isn't always necessary. If you paint it real clean, you may not need it, but this really helps areas of the miniature to pop, gives them good contrast. What we have here is some slightly thinned black ink, and I'm putting into the recesses mainly where one area of the miniature touches another, like between around the belts that's around the tabard, or tabard where it meets the armor. And adding that black edge gives real good definition between two different areas. So we know where the belt stops and the tabard starts. Last thing to paint is the base, and we are giving it a base coat of model color Dark Sea Gray. To the Dark Sea Gray, I've now added some game color earth to make it a bit more brown, more warm, and just picking out some random stones, just so we get a little bit more variety on the base than just a straight solid gray. And then we finish it off very simply with a heavy wash of black and brown ink mixed. Also have a little glaze medium in there so we can just slather it on and just let it dry as is. And you can see it just flows into the recesses here. You can see how well washes work. This is a really good example. And really quick and easy way to paint a base. And that is about it. If you were following along at home, well then congratulations, you just painted your first miniature. So we went over dry brushing and using ink washes. Both are fairly easy techniques. You have to practice with them a little bit, but they're fairly easy to master. Also remember to thin your paints. We didn't thin our paint too much here. We kept the paint fairly thick and also used a limited number of layers. We'll be going into more detail on that in the next video. And the other thing hopefully you picked up is when you have a large surface area, flat surface area that's one piece like the tabard, that doesn't mean you have to paint it one color. It really makes the miniature pop by adding additional colors where you can. So dividing the tabard into half, adding that gold line, and then actually went back and added those two little antler shaped things that are also on his shield. I painted those onto his chest, so that ties the shield into the tabard, which makes the whole miniature just look a bit more cohesive. So hope you got something out of this. Remember, this is just a basic painting video. We didn't do anything super impressive in this one. In the next chapter, we'll be working on layering, and that is the most important thing to learn when painting, I believe. Once you master layering, well, there's almost nothing you can't paint. So I will see you again very soon, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.